And we are recording. Hey, how you doing, Muthi?
What's up,
Good
everybody?
to see you.
Nice to see you too.
So I believe we are streaming now. I know that we're recording. Yes, I see we're live on Facebook. Live on Facebook, yeah. Okay. And on Instagram, and we're recording. So just in case anything went wrong, we can send that back. But I'm just really grateful for you today, for both of you, for this conversation. I'm grateful for Black art and just how it's been able to pull me through so many things and pull our people through so many things. And just the basis of how we thrive and how I thrive and just read daily. So I just want to talk about that, get into all that goodness. So I wanted to start out just with the definition that Akili gave me of Black vernacular art, just so we know what we're dealing with here. So I asked, what does the term Black vernacular art mean to you? And excuse the background noise.
Gotta love Philly.
That's life.
That's right.
It's life we live in.
Akili said, vernacular is a way of meaning making. It is the basis of how we see the world. Black vernacular art expresses what cannot be said in words. It represents a heritage, a people, a culture. So I like that definition. We can start there. So that's what we'll be talking about today. Do you want to start with just introducing yourselves? Let's go in alphabetical order. Can we start with you, Akili?
All right, so my name's Akili Davis. I am a curator and an artist here in Philly. I'm originally from South Carolina. I've actually lived all over the South, but most recently South Carolina. I moved up here for college, but now I'm a Philly girl, so I'm probably gonna be here for a while. And I guess my most recent big project that kind of got me into this was Souls Grown Deep, Artists of the African American South, which was on view at the Philadelphia Museum of Art last summer. It actually started out as an internship, but I ended up getting curatorial credit on that show, so it was kind of like my launch pad for everything. And as part of that, I got to visit Alabama, go to G's Bend, all these different places that the artists from Souls Grown Deep lived and worked in. And it's just really informed my artistic practice now, and studying Black Southern art is something I want to continue.
Okay. Thanks. Do you want to share some of those pictures, or I guess I could share from my screen? I have them here.
Yeah, you can share from your screen.
Okay. Let's see. Can we all see here?
While we doing that, Akili, I didn't know this was you, but I
Yeah,
remember you. This is so dope. And I'm glad, like, wow. Yeah. Akili was
I went
there when I was doing the installation last year. Was
that
like
was 2 years ago.
2 years ago?
That was 2 years ago.
Okay, so that was just like, yeah. And I didn't know who you were. You didn't know who I was. And like, here we are again. It was beautiful. Like, Akili, you helped me on my installation in Philadelphia, and I'm so thankful. And it's good to know that you are on this journey with your curation work. Like, I'm so happy.
Yeah, it all just kind of happened. So I'm just riding the wave.
Of course.
I really, Akili, just talking to you a little bit more with your introduction. I really liked how you spoke about, not in the soundbite, but when we were actually talking, how you spoke about what Black vernacular art means to you and why this particular exhibit was so close to you.
Yeah, I mean, when I first got up here, it was kind of not, I guess it was a little jarring, but it also like was kind of exactly what I expected. In the South, you're kind of raised with this understanding that the North is almost like this other world where they're almost like disconnected from their roots. Because of the paths of slavery, like the South is pretty much the root of Black American life. Like we all have some connection there. So growing up in that, it feels almost like, not that I was stuck in the past, but I was stuck in a history that I think really informed my worldview. So when I got up here, it was really jarring for me to see how people really regarded people in general from the South, but specifically Black people from the South. So when I got to work on this exhibit, it was extremely exciting because I felt like I was presenting my life and my story for an audience that hasn't always understood what Black Southern life is. And I think it was a celebration. I mean, I think the exhibit was a celebration. I think the artists are curations all in themselves. And my entire goal with that exhibit, and kind of I think why I ended up getting curatorial credit, was because I was so involved with influencing the narrative that we were presenting. There are a lot of nuances involved with Southern life that I don't think people always take into account. And so that's kind of what I felt like my role was in presenting these works, because I wanted their works to be presented authentically and not with like like a lens over it. I wanted it to be what it was and just make people let it be what it was.
Do you want to talk a little bit about those nuances?
Yeah, so
I feel like I'd like to know what you mean.
I think there are these preconceptions about people from the South that we're slower, that, you know, almost like this, it's like I said, like the South is like the past, like it's not existing in 2020, like it only exists in like this former like antebellum type like situation, which is like not at all true. Like the South is like constantly evolving at an incredibly rapid pace that I don't think people are always aware of or cognizant of. And so when I think about those things and I think about the misconceptions that people had just about me, it made me very protective of the work and of the artists. So I wanted to I didn't want them to focus so much on the fact that, you know, these artists are older for the most part. They tend, and they make work about Southern people and Southern places. And trying to get people out of that mindset where it's like we're talking about something like so far in the past, when it's like, no, we're talking about our present, like our constant present. So like I was just trying to get those little things through that I think really influence the narrative.
I'm ready to do some screen sharing.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Let's see if we can get some of the beautiful pictures you brought on here. Okay, Google Drive. Just a minute while we bring that up. Yeah, so how I met you, Akili, was through the Souls Grown Deep exhibit. And I was more familiar with the quilts and the women of Gee's Bend. Can you talk a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, so I ended up going down to Gee's Bend for part of a day. And it's funny, I think in art, we often think of people as like bigger than what they are. But going down and meeting these women, it was kind of just like, oh, I'm hanging out with my grandma today. Like, that's kind of how it felt. Like they all felt very familiar to me. The quilts that they make, though, are kind of arising out of the semi-isolation that happened in Gee's Bend surrounding, because the town is situated in the bend of the Alabama River. So the only quick way to get across it was through a ferry. But, you know, back in the day, the ferry was shut down because of racism.
Right.
And white residents in the town over didn't want the residents of Gee's Bend to be able to access their town. So it was cut off, and it made just life a lot more complicated. So a lot of the things that we see in the quilters' work are almost like bringing to life, in like our present context, bringing to life a past that is almost forgotten. Pretty much every resident of Gee's Bend is descended directly from enslaved peoples that were on a plantation there. So there's a certain way of life that has been preserved there, but it's also morphed into like a modern context. And
Right.
the quilt making itself, I always thought was really interesting because of how communal it was. Usually when I would think of quilt making, I would think of just one woman making one for her family. But because of how the Gee's Bend community works, women would kind of come together, you know, bring all their children, go around to each other's houses and finish each other's quilts together, which I always thought was interesting. So everybody's quilt, like their patterning was all their own, but it was made with the hands of many, which I find beautiful.
Yeah. And when they were denied entrance on the ferry, that was when they voted after Martin Luther King came to speak to them.
Right. There's an old adage that one of the mules that carried Martin Luther King's casket was from Gee's Bend. No one knows if that's true or not, but it is something that's talked about a lot. He came to Gee's Bend, and some of the artists actually talked about like seeing him when they were younger, and how influential that was in their politics.
Okay, so I have these pictures here. I'm going to see if I can bring them up for us. Pictures that you sent me from the exhibit there. Thank you for bearing with me. Okay, there they are. Okay, let's see which one of these products. Okay, are we seeing this one? Share. It's saying that it's sharing it, it's not?
Oh yeah, I don't see anything.
It's going to be a shame if we can't share these beautiful pictures, but I am going to just continue the conversation.
So Misty, I think I misunderstood your email because I thought we were going to be able to share from our computers. Would that work?
If you can, please try that. I'm trying to share it. Before it worked.
Mm-hmm.
So I have it where one participant can share at a time. So
Yeah, let's see it. Yeah, it says the host disabled screen sharing.
see if I can get that. And share. All participants can share. Okay. Now see if you can do it.
And I got a message that says, if Misty makes you a co-host, you will be able to share. So if you make us both co-hosts, we'll be able to share. Oh, yeah, we see it now.
Nice. Okay, so you want to tell us about this image here?
Yeah, so this is one of those examples of, you know, quilting kind of coming forward into the modern era, which I talked about. And this is actually a reflexive piece. We were really excited to get this piece because the print on the right originally was not part of our acquisition. But during the time that I was doing research before the exhibit, we found it and realized that the quilt on the left is actually based off of the print on the right. So the women of Gee's Bend, some of them got the opportunity to go out to Berkeley and do a printmaking workshop. And a lot of the artists from Souls Grown Deep have actually gone out to this workshop and learned how to make prints, just as, you know, like a new art form to learn. Like we're always trying to learn new things and get better. So she made this print basically by quilting almost like a very small quilt that then went on the press and then they filled it in with ink. And so it was this is a Mary Lee Dendolf piece. And so after coming back from California, she was really inspired by her time at the printmaking workshop and decided to make a quilt based off of the print that she had made. And it was really interesting because white is not a common color that you see in these women's quilts, just because like white doesn't like fully make sense for something that's supposed to be of use, because you're going to spill things on it, it's going to get dirty. But it's almost like seeing like this, like a white piece of paper with like these black ink marks on it. It's really reminiscent of the printmaking process. And so I thought this juxtaposition was really interesting, just because it shows that like even though these women are fully in their 80s at this point, they're still, you know, making time to learn new art forms, and inspires me just a little bit to keep moving and keep doing things. Let me see what else I have. This is a photo from when I was giving a tour. A lot of the basis of the quilts and the assemblages is that they're made out of found materials. So for this particular quilt that you see me talking about, it's made of basketball jerseys. But something that we realized is that, so there are two towns kind of close to each other, Gee's Bend and Rehoboth. And in Rehoboth, the artists coming out of there tended to make these pieces that almost looked like the streets of their town. So in that town, the streets tended to be like a main street with like smaller side streets coming off of it. While in Gee's Bend, you can see a Gee's Bend quilt right to the left of that. The town layout was a lot more scattered and just kind of like windy and things like that. Yeah. So that was just something interesting we ended up realizing after just looking at the pieces for like a super long time.
So the landscape is an influence. Like,
right, the geography. This section that I'm talking about here is some of the assemblages that we have. The one on the left is one of my favorites, actually. It's about the Oklahoma City bombing. He did a whole series of these assemblages. It's made out of different pieces of iron and this grating that you can't fully see in this photo. But I guess like the big thing about this was that I ended up finding a photo of the artist in process with this piece. This artist had a very difficult history. He ended up dying very young of HIV-related pneumonia. So the pieces that we have from him are pre-30. So it's getting a look into a younger person's mind on like events that were happening at the time. And this is how he felt like he could express the anger that he was feeling. A lot of the, his name was Ron Lockett. He had another piece in the show called Smoke-Filled Sky that depicts a house being burned down by the KKK.
I remember that.
Yeah, it was his pieces are powerful because I think, for me personally, because I think they represent kind of like the anger and confusion of big world events happening while you're in your 20s. Because I mean, I'm only 22. So things that happen now feel so like chaotic and important all the time because it's the first time I've seen it because I'm still fairly new to this. And I understand and I empathize with all of the emotions that he put into his work. And that was just his way of getting out how he felt and trying to understand life around him.
And this is more of what you were, with that last one, what you were saying about how Black vernacular art is not this ancient relic or artifact that's frozen in the past. Like, he worked fairly recently.
Yeah, it was in I think he died in the 90s.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, so it's not that far off.
In the tradition.
This is a Flying Geese quilt by Annie Petway. One interesting aspect of using found materials in these works is that a lot of times you would kind of just run out of material. Women were using things, just kind of like scraps of things, to continue making these quilts. And I think it always shows like the resilience of Black women to get things done, because, you know, winter comes, you need quilts to keep your family warm. And so you're going to use whatever you find to ensure that you're going to keep your family safe for the winter. And yeah, that resilience aspect is just heartwarming. It's heartwarming now because like we're not in it, but in the moment it's almost like out of necessity. It's like it's a necessity. But through this necessary work, these women found their own like artistic outlets, which I think is kind of like the whole theme of this talk, is like trying to find healing and liberation in our artwork. A lot of them didn't really consider their quilts as artwork until someone came and was like, this is art, like this is incredible. And it's just the ingenuity of these works is just really amazing to me.
Yeah, they talked about how they would hang them, they not just on the beds, but like when winter came, they would put them on the walls to like keep the air from coming in, and how they were sometimes blankets, you know, when they were back in the day, sometimes they didn't have mattresses and things like that. So yeah, these served a lot of different purposes.
Right. And when you look at quilts like this one in particular is an older one, so it was used. I think only the ones from the early 2000s in this exhibit had never been used and were made solely for display purposes. But the funny thing is, even for these quilts that were made directly for use, there was still a showing off of them in the spring after you didn't need them for the winter and you had to wash them, dry them out.
Oh, okay.
So people would put them on their lines outside of their house, their clotheslines outside their house. So when you would drive by, you would just see everyone's quilts kind of like waving in the wind. So it was hilarious to me.
That's cool. Okay.
People weren't thinking of it as art, but I'm like, you're literally having your own art shows in your yard every spring. I was like, that's the best art Basel you could ever have.
Yard art is a theme of Black vernacular art. Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah. And that's what a lot of I wish I had more pictures of the assemblages, but speaking of yard art, I went to Joe Minter's African Village in Birmingham. And it's basically it's an entire yard art installation where he's kind of keep adding to it and like subtracting from it. This is apt for the times. It says reparations now, 2003, pay African his due, America 400 years of free labor. So yeah, this piece is from 17 years ago and it was still up in his yard when I went last year. He also had this one thing, 1960 G's Ben Freedom Quilting Bee, God Bless. And then this kind of sign he made for art museums, Museums of Art USA, thank God for William Arnett. And William Arnett was the man who ended up becoming the, I guess, distributor of their works. He just found out about the people in Alabama and was like, you know what, people need to see this. So he ended up being, I guess, the middleman between the white art world and these artists. But yeah, these are just a couple pictures of the installation in his yard. It's one of those places where there's always something to look at. And just getting to talk with Joe and understanding his process, it became really apparent that this is also, in a similar way to Ron Lockett, is how he processes the events of the day and the events of the time. And he's constantly making, he has a very large space. He had pieces about Trayvon Martin in his yard, and he also had pieces about like the Iraq invasion. So it's a constantly evolving piece. And thankfully Joe is still in good health, so he's still making things. I got to meet him and his wife, lovely people. And yeah, he's just like constantly evolving this like art area, and people come from all over to see his African Village. I definitely would recommend it. It's definitely one of those things, it's one of those Southern things that where you walk up to his house and have to knock on his door and you're like, Joe, can I come in, please? Yeah, so.
I also see a connection to G's Bend with the use of found objects and which you would call scrap.
Yeah. Found objects is definitely the preferred term. I think for me personally, scrap also works for me, but when you're talking to white people, you have to use your big words. But yeah, I mean, what was one of the artists specifically actually a lot of them tend to go directly to dumps and sort through materials there, because when we think of a dump, we think of a place that's like dirty and decrepit, but a lot of times the things that we're throwing away in America are perfectly fine. So he would go and seek out items in these dumps and in these lots that would speak to him, that he could use in his work. And so found object literally means just anything you can find, anything that speaks to you, anything that you feel like you can repurpose. I mean, brown people are the original recyclers, like always reusing stuff. And I think that's really important, especially when we're trying to talk about saving the planet and all of these things.
Yeah, and how we're going to reimagine moving forward.
Yeah, that reimagining is so important.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Muthi, did you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Muthi Reed. I'm from Philadelphia, born in Detroit, Michigan in '77. My parents are from North Philadelphia. My grandparents are from Lowndes County, Alabama on my maternal side, areas of Richmond, Virginia. So kind of like roots in the South, roots in the North, and in, Detroit. I'm a media maker. I do some performance art, what they call it, assemblage, found art. I like working with materials like Akili was talking about, archival stuff. I worked a lot with an organization in Philadelphia, Media Arts Center called Scribe Video Center.
Yes.
So Scribe kind of got me. Scribe is a beautiful place. I mean, it was, the programmatics of it were devised by Louis Messiah, who's the founder and executive director. And then Tony K. Bambara, who was very close with Louis, and some of that programming that you find through Scribe, the oral history projects, the
y'all are dropping gems on me today. I had no idea.
Yeah, the community history projects that come out of Philadelphia. A lot of that, the media making and all of that, is Philadelphia and Tony K. Bambara, So that's my lineage, And so all of that kind of digging in the archives, it's like, I love how Akili was drawing it out as far as like tactile materials, because it feels a lot like the process of, with this, it's the same type of process with all type of materials, including digital materials. So yeah, I work with like sound archives, media archives, in the same way as those artists, from Alabama and other places who make that type of art. Like I see Vashti Du Bois is on here. I did meet Vashti one time. I met Vashti at Leeway. But, these are like people who I admire, from afar and from up close, people who I walk in the footsteps of and who continue to inspire my work. So, yeah, that's who I am. And yeah, like I said, I misunderstood your email, Misty, so I may have to like send you a link or two here, because I have video and sound for you.
Can you share from your?
I can, but I don't know how the video or sound stuff is gonna play.
I think it should be fine. Let's try to
be fine. Okay. So share screen?
Yes. You should be able to. I enabled so everybody could.
Okay.
Okay. So,
you can see?
Yeah, we got Bandcamp there. Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so
Give thanks for technical expertise, acumen of it.
So you can see here is like, you know, when I make work, you know, this images right here is like Black Eyed Peas. My mom taught me how to, you know, pick the peas from the, you know, pick out the peas that were kind of like, you know, looking a little sketchy from the good peas. I don't know if that's how I want to term it, but yeah. And then here, you know, all our relations, just from the images alone, you know, when I make work, it's like, this is what I'm borrowing from, you know, this image of this, I took this image at Gary's house of this dirty kind of video composite thing, you know, these Alabama hands, these man's hands, that's a relative of mine from Lowndes County. And then, you know, Billie Holiday, same thing, that's Sage. You know, this, all our relations, Kentucky, I did a residency in Kentucky, and I do a lot of like oral history gathering. Wherever I am, I'll record like conversations and stuff like that. And I'll basically like put all that in my work, even stuff I find on media, you know, like with the whole copyright and ownership and stuff, people try to make you, there's this culture of like fear of like borrowing material. Man, right. I will use anything. I don't care. And it's not that I don't want to credit, you know, who the original maker is. If I was using it in that way, you know, I'm not trying to get likes or followers or like accolades off of somebody's work. Right. But in this, in film language, we have this thing called, it has to do with copyright, and it's called fair use. Right. Where if you're creating another type, if you're borrowing the material to create another form of art, you know, another use or understanding of the material, then it's fine. And I think that a lot of artists, particularly Black and brown artists, they receive it as such. They understand that it's a nod to what they're already doing, you know, that you're in the lineage and it's out of respect. It's not trying to steal nothing or make money off of it. So that's kind of what I do. And I would just record everyday conversations and everyday stuff. So I'll just share one of these. It's kind of loud. My stuff is kind of loud, so. Can you hear it?
No, hold on.
Can't hear it.
When you go to share screen, you have to click share computer sound too.
Okay.
Misty has to do that or me?
No, you.
I have to do it?
Yeah.
Let's see. New share.
It'll be in the bottom left corner of the pop-up window.
Let me see. Bottom left corner of the pop-up window?
Yeah.
I'm not sure where I would find that at.
Is it with the microphone?
You'll need to stop sharing first in order to come back in and be able to select share computer sound.
Okay, beautiful. Thanks, Sage. So I go to share screen?
Yes.
Okay. And then what? Share computer sound. Got you. You're wonderful. Thank you, love. That's my partner, Sage Crump, speaking. Okay. Share. Actually, let me share my desktop. Okay, let me know if y'all hear it.
Yeah.
Hear it? Oh, bro. right, so I'm gonna cut it right there. Yeah. Should I share something else, or is that we could stop and talk, or what? Oh, wait a minute. I can't hear you, Misty, though. You
Yeah,
muted.
muted yourself.
Yes. Do you want to talk about that piece a little bit while it's fresh?
Yeah, I mean, it's you know, my grandmother is from Lowndes County, Alabama. Uh, uh, so those are like the kind of like the roots of that type of music. The well, you know, it's the ring shout. That was a ring shout song. I performed the ring shout with Dance Diaspora Collective, and that work is curated by an amazing artist and curator, Rashida Bumbray Shabazz, out of Brooklyn. She invited me into that work in 2012, and so that kind of is my introduction to the ring shout. There's another tradition why I'm a part of Dance Diaspora Collective, is because of where my grandmother's from. They have this devotional practice of prayer, song, you know, it's called hymn raising, line singing. You know, a lot of people know it by different names, but it's basically a real, like an old time tradition of singing and culling the spirit, you know? So being exposed to that from an early age, I used to spend my summers in Lowndes County in the care of my my grandmother's elders, you know, her sisters and brothers. My grandmother had passed, I never knew her. But because my mother would take us down south and leave us there actually with her aunts and her uncles, my grandmother's sisters and brothers, we just got exposed to this culture, and we would stay there the whole summer, you know? So that was kind of like, it was actually life-saving because I grew up in Philadelphia doing crack. And so it was like, you know, a totally different world that we were immersed in when we would go down there and spend the summer. And it gave me another perspective on life. And, you know, so that the sound, the music, and its connection with, you know, for me, like a place of wellness, a place of like, kind of like trance and immersion, it's like really powerful. So that combined with some of the sounds from a work that I did in Kentucky with some Appalachian folks.
And all of that's layered.
Yeah, it's just layered. You know, somehow those things are related to me. There's a connection between Alabama and because coal mining in Kentucky, Black laborers were brought from Alabama to Kentucky because Alabama they were already working Black folks to mine coal in Alabama when they started doing that in Kentucky, when they had moved to interior and started, you know, making folks, you know, work to do that in Kentucky. And so they basically like imported, you know, a lot of time when we think of migration or immigration, we think about it as a kind of foreign concept, but it actually happens internally for Black folks, Native folks, people of color all the time. You know, we're immigrants in our own space because we're you know, of all these conditions, you know, that we have to. So anyway, those workers, you know,
Talked about that walking.
came, I don't know if they walked, but they definitely like, because it was a little later in the history, but it was just, for me, it was a profound connection between, to talk with the folks in Appalachia. You know, most of the folks who I met were white. I also met Bell Hooks there, but it's just a beautiful way.
Just
when
gonna
you talk
throw
about, I met Bell Hooks there.
I just met Bell Hooks there. It was fine.
I'm telling you, like, she does amazing work. She lives in Kentucky now. She lives in Berea. And Berea has an interesting history.
Does she work at Berea?
She has this institute. I think it's called the Bell Hooks Institute or something like that. And it's Berea hosts it. You know what I mean? So, you know, she has her, but Berea is interesting. I mean, Berea as a university is interesting. As a college is interesting. It's just, you know, I guess the thing I take away from my work is that when you find yourself in places and spaces with people, it's not an accident. You know, it's actually a divine thing, you know, like everything is connected. So life is actually information. You know, it's not like only the things you read in books or only the things you know, take in on the news. It's like life itself, the people that you meet, you know, the places that you find yourself, it's all on purpose. So with my work, I just document as much as possible and I put it into the art, you know, so it's a way of processing.
Do you want to show us the next piece? Or does anybody have any questions about that piece?
But yeah, there is a chat function, I guess, if anyone has a question.
If not, Muthi, we can go on to the next piece.
Okay. Thanks for letting me share. Appreciate this. All right, so this next piece is a piece called Melanated Violet Fluxes, on What a Black Heart Remembers. And it's a video. I do these like audio video assemblages where basically I'm just, you know, all of the information. I'm always like consuming so much information. And so I had to find some way to put it. You know, nobody asked me to make these things. I just make them. It's almost like a notebook, you know? So, and because I'm a media maker, you know, like I said, I worked at Scribe, and Scribe is a media arts center. And so I got to facilitate on a lot of different projects, mostly documentary works. And so I'm really inspired by just the process of making things that, you know, you're not necessarily commissioned to do or anything, but just to archive, you know, your thoughts and your feelings. And I do that, you know, because I had the training and the background in media making. I do that as a writer would, you know, with text in a notebook. I do it through video making, you know. So this piece, Melanated Violet Fluxes, What a Black Heart Remembers. I'm just going to show a short little piece, but and then talk about it. Thanks, y'all. I appreciate the bearing witness. Share sound. Okay. Thanks, Misty. You're awesome. Okay.
Go ahead, man. Got it. Be scared, man. Scared, man. Ain't no cop. Ain't no cop. Ain't no cop. Guess my key. Hold my key. That's all. That's all we doing. That's all we doing. We doing nice things out there. Have a nice day. Come on, she good? She good? Come on.
Oh, I got next. I got next. I got next. I got next.
Wait, stay right there. He chilling. He cool.
Told y'all I get real, man. Bunch around savages. Bitches out here.
shit. Sorry. That's my family right there, cursing and stuff.
That's heavy. It feels like
Okay, sorry.
feels like a poem or like a freestyle rhyme, or like there's a lot of it feels like subconscious. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just yeah. I mean, it is. It feels like that. It's a combination of things that I find, things. Like I said, I take anything and everything from the internet. Especially like people's like personal kind of home videos. I feel like that's how Black folks archive our stuff. It's like we take a lot of, I just remember when I was growing up, we take pictures all the time. We got we got those disposable things. We got thousands of photos we took and got developed, and then thousands of photos that never got developed, So it's like, and then so much like with VHS, VHS came out, and then we would, if you had access to a video camera, you would do that. We record our stuff all the time. We are our own archives, so that, and, kind of mixing things together as I understand them, being related to each other. Because like, again, I don't think there are any accidents in terms of how things are layered and how we're receiving information,
Yeah, I mean, it's making me wonder what the role of this like constant archiving is in Black life. Like, what are we getting out of it that it's like something that we all seem to do constantly? It's just like, what is that doing for us? It's what it's making me wonder.
Yeah.
I think the consciousness behind it makes a difference too. You know what I mean? In any case, it's material. And I'm not sure what it does for the individual sometimes, but I think for the larger story, it kind of is a thread and a tapestry, right?
I think kind of what I'm thinking is like, almost because we live in a society that like refuses to acknowledge us as human beings or even as existing. It's like by archiving ourselves, we're like proving our existence. We're proving that we were here and that we had joy, we had pain, we had everything in between. Yeah, I'm looking at the chat. Vashti said we're recording history for ourselves. We're leaving a trail, to show that we were here. When the larger society doesn't want to acknowledge that.
I mean, I think, yeah. Go ahead, Misty. Okay. I guess one of the things that provokes me is like, I honestly, I feel like regardless of the impact of whiteness and the hugeness of whiteness, I feel like Black folks been doing that. Like, we've been archiving ourselves. We've been celebrating ourselves. So I think it's our lives are not only in response to whiteness, our lives are our own, and we do this shit and we do it so well. We embellish ourselves. Like, you look at, African culture and Native culture, like people oil up, we oil ourselves, we adorn ourselves. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like that is a part. Yeah. Like we drum, we gather, we dance, we, it's like we do this shit. We've been doing this shit, like regardless of, who the gazer is, they're learning something, monumental by, listening in and gazing upon us. What they choose to do with that, is, something we all got to reckon with,
And when there are outside aggressors, our arts have been a weapon for us and a respite.
Yeah.
I wanted to take a moment to read some of the comments. Love the idea of media making as notebook. The visual and auditory are a powerful mixtape. That was from Vashti about Muthi's practice. And Sage Crump says, another way of thinking about found material, similarly to what Akili was talking about. So what does this show us about Black art and work? Loving these works make me wonder about the idea of an archive recycling itself into the media making notebook. We document not to prove our value, but because we know few are inherently valuable.
I like that a lot. I
We
like
know
that
who
a lot. It's just like, we know we're valuable, so we're gonna just put it out there. And kind of like Muthi was saying, like, if you want to, like, if you're gonna take something from it, like, do whatever, but like, we're doing this for us.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a really good thought.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to the using of the found objects, but also the archiving. The archiving has been a big part of my practice. Reclaiming, because I felt like I had this rich well of history that was in all of my photo albums, and that was in the stories of my grandmother, my mother, my aunties, and all of their sisters and brothers. But in the wider world, I didn't see that richness and that nuance. You know, the history books seemed flat to me. And so I had the idea that it shouldn't be his story, that we could archive our own stories and create that more nuanced fabric of story for ourselves, like you said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have to, because like you said, and it's like you said, this there's this running narrative, kind of like interpreting Black lives. Like I remember when I was growing up, you know, during crack and stuff, the whole news media, everything you see, you know, everything is about a disaster, everything is about a horror story, a killing, this and that. You know, all this ways in which Black people are represented, you know, for the world to see, you know, from American media. It's just like, but when you look, you know, when we record our own stories, how different that is. You know, our own home movies are so different than that portrait, you know, our own lives, our own block parties or whatever we doing. And the depictions that we have of ourselves is so different from what the news media is telling you every day. So you got these kind of two voices, you know, that's happening, you know, and if that's televised, you know, your shit is not televised. So it becomes a whole, you know, struggle, going back to what Akili was saying. It's like this struggle with this thing, you know.
I wanted to share a little bit of work as well. However, I'm not going to screen share. We're just going to do a little studio visiting, and I'm going to just put some work in front of the camera. So give me a moment. So this is one of my paintings. So I consider myself an interdisciplinary artist. One of my thoughts is that Black art is inherently interdisciplinary, that even when we're looking at words on a page, there's this orality to it. Even when we're looking at sculpture or image, there's this rhythm and this story that, to me, connects song and movement and visual arts and writing into this one expression of Black joy and life. And so what I'm usually seeking to do, no matter what the medium, is to reclaim that story, like I said, and to document the stories of my ancestors and my people, like my particular part of the larger, you know, diasporic narrative. And so this is called 1945, and this is my mommy on a dirt road in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. And so my grandmother, who was born in 1900, she was from outside of Macon, Georgia. She was born on a plantation with a boss. And so everything that, you know, comes with that, the poverty, the terrorism of Black men and women. The lynching of her brother, Johnny, was one of the reasons why she came north and stayed here. in the 30s and 40s, she was a migrant farm worker, so she would work in Georgia. And then when the season was over, she would come north to work at a place called King's Farm in Pennsylvania, in Bucks County. And King was interesting because during the Depression, he had this huge fruit and vegetable farm, and he was one of the few large employers in the area who still had a business during that time. So he made a lot of money, but he wasn't sharing. Online, you can find they had strikes and things because the conditions were horrible. People weren't really getting paid. But so when I looked at the work in Gee's Bend and I looked at a lot of the historical photos of the plantation houses that they lived in, these were like sometimes one-room shacks, no electricity, dirt floors, and they would cover the walls with quilts, but also newspapers and things like that, wood stoves. And so that's also how my grandmother lived in the North. And I just found it really interesting that that we have these narratives about Black Southern life, but these things are right under our nose in the North also. You know, and so yeah, working with the Souls Grown Deep exhibit as a resident artist, I really got to explore some of that history. I talked to my auntie, who is my mom's like younger sister / niece. You know, Black people, if you're raised together, your sisters. And so, yeah, she would tell me about how when my mother was little, you know, they lived in that house together on the plantation, and how they would, you know, decorate the walls with the newspaper to make it fresh and for that, keep it all clean. So, and so for the Souls Green residency, I recreated a space like that as an installation. And I, for the newspapers, I actually found some vintage newspapers with from the announcement that Martin Luther King had been assassinated. And so I was able to actually use vintage newspapers in the exhibit. And I did this this painting of my mother. Yeah. And then I was also able to go to a quilting retreat with the women in Gee's Bend, Mississippi. And so I got to work with China that way, and we got to make a quilt, and it was wonderful. I just wanted to share that. But before it gets too late, I want to get into some of these questions that I had for us to talk about. The number one was, what does the term Black vernacular art mean to you? I read your definition, Akili. Did you want to expound on that a little?
Yeah. So I'm trying to like figure out how to say this. I think the term Black vernacular art, when speaking about it in Black spaces, I think is very useful, but in the larger art world, it can be incredibly limiting. And also there's this element of like primitivization that can occur. So Black vernacular art is something I would only ever call it in like a space like this. I'm excited to talk about a space like this. That was actually something we had to pull away from a lot when putting on that exhibit, because we didn't want people to like pigeonhole the work and like see it as anything other than like art. But the way I described it in the questions that you asked, I just called vernacular a way of meaning making. I mean, I don't think vernacular has to just include our speech. It's also like our patterns of being, and it's how we see the world. So when I think of Black vernacular art, I think it's expressing something unspeakable. It's expressing feelings. It's expressing a manner of being, a culture. And that's just kind of what I was trying to get across. I think, like you said, Black vernacular art is inherently interdisciplinary, because there's so many forms that it can take on, and there's so many forms it needs to take on to really really flesh out the layers of the Black experience.
Yeah, I want to pull out the what you were saying about the kind of the tension between white audiences and Black audiences when we're talking about that term, because I think it speaks to a larger pattern of thought. I think in the white world about how we look at Black aesthetics and ultimately how they look at Black people. Zora Neale Hurston and Toni Morrison both speak about ways of knowing. And Toni Morrison in particular talks about how because Black people were disregarded, our ways of knowing were disregarded. And so in an attempt to rise in society, we turned away from some of those terms and started to look at them through the white lens. Because terms like I've seen definitions where they apply terms like primitive or self-taught means that it's vulgar, right? Or any other negative term. But when you look at it, self-taught only means low quality or primitive if you believe the people that taught you or the cultural incubator it comes from is primitive, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's frustrating that that is the overall premise in the art world, that self-taught means those things. So it's also just like incredibly frustrating when I want to work with Black people and Black art, but I'm also working in these institutions where I constantly have to be thinking about how white people are going to perceive it. It's just like a never-ending game. So yeah, those were the decisions that had to be made, even if it had to like pull away from a meaning that like I personally had no problem with, because self-taught in a way like is a pulling away from like white academia, because it means you weren't trained in these like New York institutions. Like that's really all it means.
Like with the filter, and this is something that I've spoken with Muthi about before, is the idea of making it about one person as opposed to, because self-taught is even a misnomer, because a lot of times we're talking about someone that's community taught, not necessarily self-taught, right?
Exactly, and that was the case with the Gee's Bin quilters. It wasn't like they magically figured out how to make quilts. I mean, we had really old archival imagery from like the 1920s of like small children, because it kind of started as like small children would come with their mothers to other people's houses to like finish their quilts. So it was something that they were seeing and kind of experiencing from a very early age. And you start out, they have you go out and pick scraps. They start teaching you how to do like small stitches, and finally by the time you're like 13 or 14, you're making full quilts on your own if you're a woman. And so it's a process, and I think
and a rites of passage when you describe it.
And a rite of passage. It's like showing. It's almost like becoming like. It's almost like a second puberty. Like it's like your communal ritual of like coming into like your adult life is finally being able to like make one of these quilts with other people, and then continuing to pass on the tradition. And I guess self-taught in that way plays into like the individualism of white culture, because I think Black people tend to be more communal, just because of our ways of existing, our ways of being.
And in lineage, you know.
And the lineage. So the term self-taught like removes that part from it, which is really unfortunate.
Yeah, because even like I've been to art school, but I felt like I was there to say that my grandmother's art is fine art. You know what I mean? So, so it doesn't have to be in those venues, but when I bring it there, I don't disrespect it.
Right.
You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Muthi, did you want to chime in with your definition?
About Black vernacular, I mean, I don't really have a definition for it. I think that's really my approach to language. language for me is a listening thing, and a space for, it's like music. So when I think about Black vernacular, yeah, and I also don't have this this relationship with the art world. Like I don't know what the expectations are around certain things. I think in a way,
a different art world, maybe not gallery art, but like you were talking about residencies and different things.
yeah, I mean, I'm speaking about like I'm happy I don't have those. Well, like I understand that the art world exists, right?
Right.
There's this idea of the art world, right? And I accept. I mean, and I also don't care, like, there are certain things that I care about, and those are the things that I care about. And I think that, I have to convince myself of that, to show up like that, because it's not easy to say I don't care in the face of such a thing called the art world, and not to make it bigger than it is or smaller than it is, but just to say that it's like, racism, it's like colonization, it's like settler colonialism. It's like all of these are really they're big structures, big concepts and stuff like that. And also they're not ours, not ours.
Yeah.
It's someone else's creation.
Yeah.
And so in a way I had to make my voice, my relations voices bigger than that. Or if not bigger than that, at least like, well, let me say bigger than that. You know what I'm saying? Like, because those are the things and the people that I know best, and I know love me, and I know love, the things that I love. So like, in a way, I kind of feel like I'm not going to, address such a thing as the art world with any sort of like knowledge. I don't need to. I have my own school. I have my own things. I have my own people. I have my own preoccupations. So
it's building worlds.
Yeah, exactly. Like El Hagan, who's a prolific artist in Philadelphia. Prolific artist. El Hagan, he talks about how we have to build alternative universes. We can't just be in the universe that is said, you be in this universe. We have to build universes that, are what we want, how we see ourselves, who's dreaming with us. It's like we have to build alternative universes. Yeah. So Black vernacular, I kind of deal with it as its own thing. Like I respect vernacular. And then I also like think about etymology. Like I respect vernacular. That's how people communicate. That's how what's what. I respect it as a term. I think it's basically for Black folks and for anybody for anybody, when you deal with vernacular, it's a politic. I mean, when you enter that space of talking about vernacular, it is contested terrain. And so I think you have to step into it as such, and what I mean is like, so somebody's talking about vernacular, or even Black vernacular, is like understanding the structures that have been set into place to define vernacular for Black people. Yeah. And to recognize that, our very existence is, is basically like a slap in the face to that. And so to walk with that. So I think whoever is in the room, I think I take Black vernacular. I take vernacular seriously, because it's a way of expression. It's like folks in Appalachia, Appalachian vernacular, and I don't, because this place that we're living in, that we've been living with, has created a bubble that is not believable by any vantage point, not even for white people. They don't even show the true portrait of white people. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's no true portraits what this bubble that they have created, you know, that we're like constantly kind of seeing ourselves through is not true for anyone. So it's like, what is true? That's vernacular.
Yeah.
You know? So how do we, you know, dig into that and also dig into the politic of it, you know? That it's like, if you're really talking about if you're talking about vernacular, what you talking about then, you know? Yeah.
The ways of the people.
Mm-hmm.
And in particular, yeah, like I'm interested in how it heals, how it helps us understand, how it cultivates our own sense of self, like you said. I feel like right now there's a lot of entities that are pulling for Black energy. Almost every day I get another message from somebody that wants me to know that they stand with me for some reason. You know, and it's people competing for our attention and our energies and agendas. And I feel like it's important for us to lean on that inner knowing, you know what I mean? And to have an expanded space of imagination for what kind of world we want to build. Because in times of change, you know, things can go in whatever direction, but I trust us to be directional, you know what I mean? But through authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It reminds me of this phrase. I think it's this. ¿Y dónde está tu abuela? It's a poem or a song or something like that. I think it comes from Borinquen. And it's basically, it's like revealing the truth of, you know, you want to present this very white portrait of yourself. But the larger question is,
and where is your grandma?
Yeah, where's your grandmother? You know, exactly. So it's like, you know, vernacular feels like it gets at that. You know, it's like, what's the real picture here? You know, who your people, where you really come from? You know, and I'm not just talking about today, but for the longevity of how long y'all been. You know, who you? What are you?
And that's justice, that's memory, that's everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think in terms of like healing and liberation, which was like the other question you had asked, I think of Black vernacular art as a way to like take a glimpse at like Black innovation outside of the constraints of white supremacy and outside of this white world. I don't want to think about these pieces within the constraints of that so-called art world, but it's like, I don't know where I was going with that. Yeah, I think it takes a look at Black innovation in a really interesting way. I think we need to know our past to inform our future. So I think Black vernacular art has a lot to do with Afrofuturism as well. I think it definitely informs the movement. You got really excited about that talk on that.
I feel like the Black vernacular space, of course, is the root of Afrofuturism, because that's the root of like possibility. One thing that we didn't talk about specifically is how vernacular relates to our spiritual arts, our rituals, our plantings, our divinations, you know, our libations. All of these are part of our arts. Shouting in church, just the Black church ritual, the way that the ushers move, and you know what I mean, the choir and all of that. I think all of that is rich for imagining, and I think that is like, I think that's where we learn to dream beyond the material. Is from our grandmothers' kitchens and those that belief that that our consciousness and our rituals and our movements could affect, you know, the spiritual and in turn the physical world. You know, that's where we get that sense of dreaming from, and from there, you know, we move into Afrofuturism to create worlds, right?
Yeah, I don't think you can dream of something that you don't know, at least in part. Like our dreams are pulling from something. They're pulling from a hope. They're pulling from this almost like nearby future that we can like almost feel, but there's just like a little bit of something missing. And I think it's that like internalized knowledge, internalized culture that we have through like our lineage, like you guys keep saying, that is like what's bringing us forward, because we don't know everything about our mothers, grandmothers, great grandmothers, but we can feel it in our bodies, and that's what carries us forward to this like hope of a new future.
Yeah, and we don't know exactly what the future is going to look like, but you know, we're carrying forward those prayers, you know, into the future, and those hopes for liberation and complete healing for our people and our planet.
I mean, I think our ancestors are always watching over us. They're pushing us in a direction. We just don't know which one. You're muted.
So we just had a few minutes left. I wanted to know, Muthi, did you want to talk about the role of the Black vernacular in healing and liberation? I think you touched on it some.
I mean, when y'all were talking, I was thinking about my, as y'all two was exchanging, I was thinking about, it took me, you know, to my, this devotional practice that my grandmother people do in Lowndes County. And, you know, that people do all over, right? They're primitive Baptists, you know, they were the primitive Baptist tradition. And it's a white tradition, but you know, Black folks gonna do what they're gonna do. So I think, the way they do it is simultaneous time, you know. So like you all, when y'all were talking, it was like, it made me think of it because I was thinking about how basically like time, space, and even like future, past, present is all simultaneous time. So as we are dreaming, we're also like living, we're also like, as we are dreaming, we're also like in the present, we're in the past. It's like no separation. Like the way they do the devotionals is it'll be singing. So the deacons will raise it, or elders in the church raise the hymn, and it'll be, it's all a cappella, no instrumentation. This is like the first part of the service. So it happens before, like this is the first part of the service. And then after that is like the youth choir, and it's all the, you know, instrumentation, the drumming and all that stuff, like the more contemporary kind of like gospel roots or whatever. But this devotionals are kind of like slow and dirgy and all a cappella, you know, raised, you know, whoever raises a hymn is either going to be a church elder or a deacon or something like that. And so it starts off kind of like really slow, but it's like choreographed in a way where you'll be singing, praying, and they do this hand thing, you know, it's like a welcoming. And then you get up at certain parts and you move around at certain parts. And it's just like, it's kind of chaotic, you know, it's a lot happening at one time. But it just reminds me, it's a reminder to me that we are not linear, you know, that our dreaming doesn't happen later, you know, it happens now, and it's all the time, you know, that our past was not the past, you know, the future is now. It's like that statement, I don't know where that statement is from. Actually, I do know where it's from, but I can't name it right now. But, you know, this statement, the future is now. It's like all of these things are true. I think, you know, we have to, because we've been so trained in a certain way, we got to really like unpack a lot of stuff in order to really like live in that, like live in that, those, it's not a fiction, like it's real, you know, like this is our memory muscle, as Katrina Hazard Donald talks about. Katrina Hazard Donald from Philadelphia, historian. She talks about, you know, we have to live the things that are a part of our memory muscle. You know, it's not a dream, it's not a fiction. Like this shit is real, you know? So simultaneous time, Future is now. The past is always present. You know. Yeah.
That reminds me of don't wait till the battle's over, shout now. You know in the end you're gonna win.
Come on.
Don't wait till the battle's over, shout now. You know in the end we're gonna win. So we got it.
Misty. Come on,
Yes,
Misty.
we are a poly people.
Come on.
Got it.
Thank you, Misty.
Yeah. So I just keep that. I listen to some spiritual teachings of Abraham, and sometimes they can get kind of funny with that the whole law of attraction thing. But one of the things that made sense to me when they were saying that sometimes can be so overwhelmed situation that their prayers go out, but their grandchildren receive the answers to those, you know. And that's actually something that my grandmother used to tell me all the time. She would say that she knew that her grandmother's prayers were covering her. And she would say, I'm not always praying for myself. I'm praying for you. I'm praying for your children. I'm praying, you know what I mean? So, so I know that the energy that we're putting out here with the arts, with the protesting and just the dreaming, you know, even if you're just meditating on what liberation looks like and expanding our minds to true like freedom and healing for our planet, you know, we'll get there, right?
We are there.
Yes.
Yeah, I think
Shout out.
time. Yeah, I think Black people definitely have a completely different sense of time that makes us who we are. But like more ways than one. So.
So thank you all so much for being here. Thank you so much. I appreciate the space to center our practices and our aesthetic and our people.
Thank you, Misty. Thank you for inviting us into the conversation. And thank you for your work, all that you do, you know, all that you are. Appreciate you.
Thank you. I want to say thank you to the Leeway Foundation for helping us out with that Art and Change grant this year so we could do this work. The Black Spatial Relics team.
Thank you, Black Spatial Relics.
We're broadcasting a dance, Ronda Rise did a beautiful, powerful warrior healing dance in the garden. So we're going to broadcast that. And thank you to the Color Girls Museum. Thank you so much, Vashti.
Thank you, Vashti.
We appreciate her energy as an entity, protection, praise, and grace, always. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here. Right.
Peace, y'all.
Peace. Love you all. Peace.
Bye.